Good morning. Good morning. I'm a visiting minister this morning. My name is Reverend Mary-Margaret Earl. I'm from the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry and happy to be here with you. I welcome all those to First Parish UU of Medfield and welcome those who are live streaming from home. Welcome any who are visiting. We hope that you will stay for social hour downstairs after the service. This congregation first gathered in 1651, and this historic meeting house was built in 1789 on the unceded ancestral land of the Nipmuc. Welcome to this place. Here we search for truth and understanding. Here we celebrate life and contemplate its mysteries. Here we share healing and wholeness. So whoever you are, wherever you come from, whomever you love, we welcome you to this congregation.
For this morning's chalice lighting, we lift up the words from the humanitarian Albert Schweitzer for times such as these. Help me to fling my life like a flaming firebrand into the gathering darkness of the world.
I read that the insect kingdom is collapsing, that the dense eastern woods have been beaten back and defeated. The lawns, endless seas of lawn, are sprayed and pressed into obedience, all real, buzzing, bursting, impertinent life stilled into a stretch of green carpet. The bulldozers clear the trees and fill in the ponds, and the frogs fall silent. Lights along the highway, lights in backyards, lights everywhere blind nighttime scavengers, confuse migrating birds. The moths seek the moon and exhaust themselves at street lamps. Fireflies flicker out. I read that the living world is flickering out. And so I rise in the morning I fill the bird bath with fresh water. I rise in the morning and take a slender shovel and make space for a handful of goldenrod. I let the milkweed grow and open and surprise me with her purple flowers, her glorious blossoms, when once I did not even know that milkweed eventually blooms if you let her. Yesterday, I watched a swallowtail butterfly dance on the bee balm. There is no way to describe it except as a dance of joy. I read that maybe the world will collapse. I rise in the morning, and like the leaf that curves at the edge of despair into song, I plant something, a handful of goldenrod. I do sing. This is how I save myself. This is how we save ourselves. We sing. We plant something. We love something. We rise in the morning and begin again. Come together in peace. Oh, come together in joy and sharing. Come together in knowing, caring, freeing. Come together, oh, come together, oh, come together in love. I invite you to stand and join with me in our opening hymn, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door, hymn number 1. I invite us to breathe in and breathe out and let our shoulders fall, close our eyes, come fully into this place. Inhaling and exhaling, coming fully into this moment, the only moment that we have. Coming together and pausing in peace for a moment of prayer and then quiet. Creative presence, ever moving, shaping snowflakes and the curve of tree branches, making and remaking, and moving through us now in every breath, present, ready at the edge of each intention. We gather in heavy times. We carry the weight of worry. We carry swift-moving news and loud clamor, and they sit on our hearts and weigh on our minds. we carry too our own personal worries, health, loss, family, friends, worries in our local community. All of these we lift up, opening ourselves to an infinite reservoir of hope in the midst. Opening ourselves to the possibility of new solutions, reminding ourselves that nothing ever is closed, that possibility is always around us, among us, when we quiet ourselves, when we still ourselves, when we open slowly and wait. Breathing in and out, we open ourselves. Breathing in and out, we open ourselves to your presence and enter together into the silence. I invite up Dewey to share our reading.
Today's reading is an excerpt from the Some of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee. The American landscape was once graced with resplendent swimming pools, some big enough to hold thousands of swimmers at a time. In the 1920s, towns and cities tried to outdo one another by building the most elaborate pools. In the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration put people to work building hundreds more. By World War II, the country's 2,000 pools were glittering symbols of a new commitment by local officials to the quality of life for their residents, allowing tens of thousands of people to socialize together for free. By the 1950s, the fight to integrate America's prized swimming pools would demonstrate the limits of white commitment to public goods. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Oak Park Pool was the grandest one for miles. the crown jewel of the Parks Department that also included a zoo, a community center, and dozens of other public parks. Dorothy Moore was a white teenager lifeguard when a federal court deemed the town's segregated recreation unconstitutional. Suddenly, black children would be able to wade into the deep end with white children at the Oak Park pool and the rec center. Black elders would get chairs at the card tables. The reaction of the city council was swift. Effective January 1st, 1959, the Parks Department would be no more. The council decided to drain the pool rather than share it with their black neighbors. Of course, the decision meant white families lost a public resource as well. It was miserable, Mrs. Moore told a reporter 5 decades later. Uncomprehending white children cried as the city contractors poured dirt in the pool, paved it over, and seeded it with grass that was green by the time summer came along. To defy desegregation, Montgomery would go on to close every single public park and padlock the doors of the community center. It even sold off the animals in the zoo. The entire public park system would stay closed for over a decade. Even after it reopened, they never rebuilt the pool. Today, we don't even notice the absence of the grand pools in our communities, where grass grows over former sites. There are no plaques to tell the story of how racism drained the pool, but the spirit that drained these public goods lives on. The impulse now manifests in a subtler fashion, more often in a pool of public resources than a literal one.
Well, it is good to be back in Medfield again. I was here some years ago, but it's been a little while, so I thank you for welcoming me this morning. And I thank my dear colleague, Reverend Dave, for inviting me to come be with you, and I hope he is getting some rejuvenating time on sabbatical, and that you are all faring well. I want to thank Dewey for all the work that he's done to corral this service this morning, and Eva for the music, and all those who participated in putting together the service. My colleague, Maggie Paula, is here from the UU Urban Ministry, and she's going to be in social hour should you have questions about the work of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry after the service. Medfield is one of 46 Unitarian Universalist congregations around Greater Boston that are connected to the work of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry as members. And the Urban Ministry was founded 200 years ago by a Unitarian minister who was striving for social justice in Boston with the combined power of Unitarian congregations. So congregations like Medfield continue to play an important role in our work to dismantle racism and to advance racial, social, and economic justice in Boston and Greater Boston. Today at the Urban Ministry, we have a youth program that serves high school students of color from Boston. We have a domestic violence shelter that serves families who are rebuilding their lives. And we partner with Roxbury businesses and organizations so that we can bring together congregations and the Roxbury community together to work for justice. Our Medfield delegates are Margaret Rolfe, Dave Egan, and Nicole Silvestri Hall. They work to connect us, so I thank them for their service. Importantly, Reverend Dave is an esteemed member of our board of directors, and he co-chairs our congregational task force, when the charge of that task force is to help member congregations expand in their ability to work with us to advance racial justice. So it is a pleasure to be here to thank you for the ways that you've connected with us, for your support for our Seeing Me in the World program, your support for our shelter, and to thank supporters like Margaret and Don Rolfe, Jeanette Rule, and Dave Egan and Katrina Lund. So thank you all. This morning, I wanted to share with you a trip that I took in September to the Canadian Rockies. Has anybody been to the Canadian Rockies? Yeah, we're thinking about Canada a lot lately, right? The Rockies are pretty splendid. I went there as I was reflecting on my 10th year, a decade of serving at the urban ministry. So I hiked in a stunning landscape, looking back at what I've learned in this work as I climbed up a steep elevation, adjusting an awkward backpack, taking in views of glaciers and azure blue water. It wasn't easy going up. I bruised my toes coming down, but it was a wondrous trip. I thought of how it is like the work for justice, bit by bit, sometimes hard and uncomfortable, with unexpected gifts along the way. I looked back at arriving in Roxbury in November of 2014, when it became clear that the work before us was more than our programs. There was this core question beneath them. How would we address racism in Greater Boston? We're an historically white-led organization in the heart of Boston's historic African-American community. And we're encircled by mostly white Unitarian Universalist congregations who are reaching out to us to help make change. I was gripped by the challenge and the potential, and how much I had to learn to get my arms around it. But before I could do that, before I could get my arms around that, I was called on to preach in pulpits like this one. And I brought no expertise that first season, no profound message. I brought questions. What did it mean to be a white-led organization in Roxbury? How do we forge real relationships across difference? How do we make change that really matters? And I began simply listening, learning, and following. In these 10 years, the police officers who killed Michael Brown were not indicted, sparking the Black Lives Matter movement. We witnessed the election of 2016 and the killing of George Floyd. White people seemed to be shaken out of a collective slumber. We learned that the waters of racism in the United States go deep. And the more that I've learned, the more I've seen that the waters go deeper still. I first learned about health, wealth, and educational disparities that mean Black people live poorer and die sooner than white people. There is a 23-year difference in life expectancy in Roxbury and Whiteback Bay, just 1 mile away. And the waters went deeper still. I learned about the racism that was baked into the systems that give birth to those statistics, the prison, healthcare, and food systems. African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white people. Only half of African Americans have private health insurance versus 75% of white people, and 22% of Black people in the United States experience food insecurity, twice the rate of white people. And though deep waters grew colder, I learned how those systems are rooted in enslavement, how the police system grew out of slave patrols, how founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson were themselves enslavers whose economic well-being was secured through bondage, how after the Civil War, the prison system replaced enslavement as Blacks were charged with petty crimes and sentenced to hard labor, sometimes in the very same fields where plantations once stood. I learned that we cannot disentangle modern educational, housing, and economic systems from this history. Racism isn't a fistful of solvable problems, it's foundational. And to move forward in any meaningful way on our nation's and our region's social ailments, we must face it together. I packed a book on my trip to the Rockies. It was the book from which we heard Dewey read earlier, The Sum of Us, by researcher Heather McGee. She began her research after the 2016 election when many of us were asking, why did people not vote in their own self-interest? Does anybody remember asking that then or now? She looked at the racism that had showed itself in the election and in our nation's political turmoil, and her thesis is this: our country's ongoing struggle for meaningful healthcare reform, for positive economic change, even investment in infrastructure like roadways, our struggle to achieve collective good despite our abundant wealth and resources can be traced to enslavement. White people, McGee writes, have been conditioned to believe in a zero-sum equation, that if people of color gain, they lose. And the stronger a person's racial resentment, the likelier to reject policies and investments that benefit all of us, including themselves. McGee asserts that etched deeply into the white psyche is a value that is placed on whiteness. And when whites see Black people in the swimming pool, they'd rather not have a pool than to be in it with them and to erase the status that is conferred by their whiteness. And it is this deep-seated disfigurement of the white psyche that billionaire titans and political tacticians lean into with racist dog whistles to keep us separated and to maintain their power and control. It especially harms people of color, and that can't be overstated, but it also doesn't serve any of us except for a very few at the top. McGee writes, racism works against non-wealthy white Americans. It lowers their support for government actions that could help them economically out of a zero-sum fear that it could help the racialized undeserving as well. McGee draws a through line showing how this zero-sum thinking has collapsed unions that could advocate for all workers, how it's powered disinvestment of public services such as higher education. When more students of color began attending college, she writes, public funding dried up. College students of color 40 years ago were just 1 in 6. Now they're near half. And parallel to that rise in students of color came cuts to per-student funding. In the past 30 years, public college tuition, as we know, has almost tripled. She posits that it's why states like Texas refuse Medicare expansion, refusing what's basically free federal funding for them that would mean that all rural Texans would have better access to hospitals. That refusal is fear that expanding public health care would draw in and serve more people of color. Black people suffer the most from racism, but our whole human family is harmed. Solidarity, she says, is the answer. Solidarity is the answer. She quotes a longtime activist who she interviewed in her research, quote, if we didn't have these sharp divisions based on race, we could make enormous progress in terms of making sure that people are not hurting as badly as they are or deprived of what clearly are the necessities of life. And McGee continues, over the years that I have sought answers to why a fair economy is elusive, it has become clear to me that how white people understand what's wrong and what's right about our diverse nation, who belongs and who deserves, is determining our collective course. That's the crux of it, she says. Can we swim together in the same pool or not? It's a political question, yes, she writes, and it's one with economic ramifications, but at its core, it's a moral question, end quote. And for us, it is a question as people of faith. I no longer believe that we can advance justice in the United States in a meaningful way without dealing with a history of enslavement and its inherited racism, not in fighting climate change or in fighting hunger. Racism cannot be separated from the rest of our social justice commitments because it is part and parcel of it. And that means that we must build connection and solidarity across race in Greater Boston. And in our segregated world, that can seem daunting. But as people of faith, let us not be daunted. We are simply called to begin. We are called to do what we can in as many ways as we can for as long as we can. After 10 years at the urban ministry, I still bring to this pulpit no more expertise than when I began. But what I have is a conviction that building relationships across race is foundational for all justice work. And I come with the same strategies as the year I arrived. To build real connections, those of us who are white need to listen and learn and follow. At the urban ministry, we listen to a community to guide us forward. In partnership with the Roxbury Historical Society, we began research into the history of enslavement by the congregation at First Church Roxbury, whose church and campus we inherited and now inhabit. We published a report citing the names of 58 enslaved persons owned by First Church Roxbury congregants, with even the first minister being an enslaver. And we asked Roxbury community members to guide us forward. For the past year, neighbors have charted our course, seeking to learn more about the lives of those named in the report and to track their genealogy to find whether there are descendants living in Roxbury today. It might seem that the urgency is confronting the racial injustices that are happening right now, and yes, that is important, but the Black community says this also matters: historic truth-telling, making the past visible, and deeply honoring the lives of those who were dishonored by our religious ancestors. This matters urgently too. And we learn. For the past 5 years, we've held a series of webinar lectures called Community Conversations, in which we invite in leaders of color to speak to challenges that are facing the community of color in Roxbury. They've spoken on gentrification and displacement, educational inequity, the racial wealth gap, or health outcomes. We learn for an ever-deepening understanding of past and present. We've built a tours program led by local community members and students in our after-school programs, highlighting the history of the community that we stand in. These tours tell the story of public art in Nubian Square, how magnificent murals around us grew out of the work of graffiti artists, or about the trees of John Eliot Square, where we're located, and how important and threatened the tree canopy is in urban spaces. And we follow. Our work in partnership in Roxbury has deepened. When the NAACP asked us to fill a bus to go to an action in Washington, D.C., we filled the bus. As the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute addresses violence in the city, we stand behind them, inviting congregations to join the Mother's Day Walk for Peace in Dorchester. When the housing advocacy organization City Life asks us to stuff envelopes, we stuff envelopes. We build solidarity by showing up again and again in the spirit of listening and learning. When you enter the doors of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry, you see on the entry wall a quote by the Aboriginal activist Lila Watson. It says, "If you are here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." These words resonate as a spiritual truth. But there's also a concrete truth here too, that the sum of us reminds us, the truth that until we grapple with the history of enslavement and racism and bridge our divides and commit to working in solidarity, we will not be free, not any of us, of all that ails us. We need to work together. On my last long hike in the Canadian Rockies, we climbed up Larch Valley to Sentinel Pass, steadily making a 2,500-foot elevation gain to a stunning view, and then we began our descent. And as we descended, we came upon startled hikers who were warning us that a grizzly bear was along the trail ahead. She was in a state of what is called hyperphagia, a trance-like focus on eating enough calories for winter. Our hike leaders reminded us of what is called for when we are faced with grave danger. Make noise, people, and stick together. And so we held close and began singing until we were safely through and the trail ended. That is what gets us through the hard and dangerous days ahead, friends. Let us sing loudly, reach out to the whole human family, and stick together. And may it be so, and amen. I invite up Don Rolfe.
These are tough days for those who have the principles and beliefs that us in this congregation all hold together. The UU Urban Ministry is on the front lines of this. We have a tough task in front of us. It is us, our membership, our activities, and your support for this congregation, which keep these walls which hold love in and keep hate out. And with that, reflecting Jeanette's comment, how we can do this. Please be generous.
I invite you to join with me in singing our final hymn, number 168, One More Step.
Take one more
Go forth knowing that your gifts are enough. Your gifts are fully sufficient for this moment. So give them. Go forth in courage, in faith, and perseverance. Amen.